this will probably be one of the last places affected in the U.S., but it will be in the future. And I agreed. I said, all these other things will spin around outside, but eventually, as the whole does, so does the microcosm. It's going to be on everybody's plate and everywhere. See, if you still, Christian and I had talked about Ukraine back in the day. He and I, had a few private phone calls, done a couple interviews, but we always kept coming back to this place in Ukraine when the Bolsheviks had starved 12 million people to death that did not agree with their politics. So if you want to look back into the Holodomor or Holodomor, take a look at that chapter of history and how many people died during that time from no food. Now, see, a short Cliff Note version was the mechanization of farming allowed farmers in Ukraine, because it had the best soils, quote, breadbasket of Europe in the 1930s, quote, breadbasket of Europe 2022, means they can grow the most food in that area. Well, back in the 1930s, when mechanization came and they moved from horse and they moved into tractors, they could use a tractor to plow a lot more field. Areas of the Ukraine became incredibly rich. And when I say rich, they built their own ports for exports of their grains. But then the rest of the USSR at that point was like, whoa, we're so poor out here, you're so rich there. And they blame, and that was part of, so if you go back in the true history of it, go back, it was part of the empires of Russia. And it's gone through so many iterations, it's hard to quantify where it sits today on the landmass that it holds compared to before. And then you could, toss in Tartaria and lost continents and lost civilizations and hidden history. And, we can go down that gamut for ages. Along with the Holodomor, where they starved the people. So the Bolsheviks at that time, communists, were coming in saying, whoa, you over in Ukraine were making way too much money. You're selling the grains. You're like the richest area, and it's all your fault because everybody else is poor. Well, then push came to shove about, we're not going to give you more taxes. We're not going to give you the grain for free. And Russia had more weapons. They just come in. The Bolsheviks just sealed that place off. Okay, so you understand the difficulty of Russia invading because it's so large and so vast. And that's what's spouted in the news is, put the hand on the Bible truth. It's a vast country. Vast. From the crop growing lands to the cities, which take 8 to 10 hours to travel through on a bus going 60 miles, 70 miles an hour to the next cities. It takes up at least a quarter of the United States, at least. That vast of an area was roped off where nothing can go in. No seeds, no farm machinery, no tools, nothing. And when the Bolsheviks went in there, these communists, they burned every house. They stole every single tool. They stole every single seed. They killed every single farm animal on the way to feed themselves. And if they were full, they would just shoot it so the farmers couldn't have it. And they just destroyed like locusts going through there where there was nothing left as they fenced it off. Now look on the map and follow the news stories today, how vast, how incredible a feat that was to put a full fence around that country to starve 12 million people to death. That were the ones that had the knowledge to grow the food. That was the largest grain basket in the 1930s as well. And what it took with people armed on the bad side to come in and either shoot, kill, maim, arson, and burn everything through. It was, they always have this saying down in the southern parts here, Sherman went through Georgia. Well, Sherman, being the northern general, did the exact same, burn and pillage everything that they saw as far as the eye could see, and then more, and pay people to do it on their periphery. And they burned a line through Georgia, and I say there's nothing left. They had to rebuild everything. It was the same way that the Bolsheviks went through Ukraine and destroyed everything and starved. See, what the thing for me was, how could it got down to the point where you couldn't even carve a stick. They had nothing. They had literally nothing. They took even knives, nothing away. So imagine going back to being a caveman again, where you were trying to find sharpened stones to carve the edge or the end of a tree to make it into some sharp, blunted instrument so you could dig the soil to put a seed in there to grow it. That's where they went to. And that's what's happening to our planet right now. And I hope the story resonates because our planet is under siege. As much as the Ukraine was in the 1930s and there's Dolmor that you can find through history, and I hope everybody looks it up and sees the graphic images and just the barbaricness of what the communists did and the reasoning for it. That's a tiny little place, but this is a planetary siege happening right now. Our planet is under siege. Ransom?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, with seriousness, you think about those events, and a lot of modern people don't think that they can, experience those same things. And we know that's nonsense. It can happen in less than a decade. If you study any war throughout history, starvation's been a major, tool for the forces to use. And I've been showing everybody this, and I know it's kind of an old story, but it's being rehashed in a new way here. The baby
I like hash. Keep going.
Baby formula is even getting harder to come by as retailers across the U.S. Are having shortage. It says that retailers all across the country, 40% of their top selling baby food formula products were out of stock this week. 11,000 stores they're talking about. And this jumped, the percentage of out of stock levels went from 11 to 31 and 40% just in April. So that's what, 30% increase at least. That's horrible. I mean, think about what that means. So if you are planning ahead, if you're pregnant or you have children that are going to need formula, you might want to look into getting a goat. Because a lot of women experience the problem of not being able to produce enough milk. And if you add to that, a lessening nutritious diet or access to good foods, you can see how this could be a major issue in the near term, meaning like in the next year, the next 2 years.
Wait, Ransom?
Yeah.
Ransom, could I stop for a second?
Yeah.
So you're a man. You're not allowed to talk about women's issues unless you're a man who identifies as a guy who can give birth. And then because you can give birth, then you're allowed to talk about the issue.
No, I'm allowed.
So continue.
I got a 1-year-old. It's already past that, at least in most states where we can debate whether or not it's a human. That's crazy because, when my kid was first born and I'm sitting in the little place where I took the kid and they're sewing my girlfriend back up, and I'm looking at this kid and I had that thought. I couldn't help having that thought that there are people right now in other states that are debating whether or not to get rid of a similar aged child within hours of the same age, and telling me that one of them is, not alive and one of them is, you can leave that debate, I guess, to yourself. But for me,
is that in China?
When I'm looking at my kid, breathing and I'm feeling it in the womb and it's listening to music, I'm pretty sure that it's alive in there. I'm no biologist, of course, like you said, I can't tell, but I'm worried about my already born 1-year-old still drinking formula right at this point, because we're already having difficulty actually getting it here on time. And we're already going through this issue. So ordering it online is kind of hard. You may or may not get your order in if it's not sold out, but not being able to go to the store and buy a non-toxic baby food is becoming a little bit difficult. And according to this article, it's going to become more difficult. So when we're talking about nutrient dense foods, a big topic I'm sure a lot of people want to know about is what things can you put out in your garden that can become instant baby food? And, like a lot of them, squash, tomatoes, beans, all that stuff that you can mush up or smush up and feed your child. We may be going back to those days where you're going out right now to find something in your garden for today that's fresh, nutrient for your child to make it. Because, I'm sure every one of you has seen pictures of countries that have starvation problems, food problems, where you see the little babies, little kids with their bellies bloated out while they're skinny as a skeleton because the gases are pooching their bellies out. That's really easy to happen in a short amount of time because you got to remember those kids are not very old. So yeah, maybe an adult can, live through hard times like we've seen in the past and make it through and survive a couple of years of famine or 2 or 3 years of food shortages. But children don't work out the same. And that's a big topic. I think that people that are growing their own food, you got to remember you need to be growing stuff that's easily digestible for your small children if you have them. I just thought that was a point. And what about the baby food there? A lot of people are going to be having some real problems if they can't feed themselves and they can't find the formula. I know a lot of people aren't so picky; they'll just get whatever. But what if even the low generic types of baby formula start becoming difficult to buy? You want to see some angry people? That's where to start. Is you start with the children not being able to feed their children right, and things become more chaotic as this reaches. And we've seen in other countries where like they set up their family by necessity where the children stay in the home until they're married. You probably have mom and pops there and of both families probably all living collecting resources and everything. We might have to go back to that system here in the US before it becomes bad and not afterwards.
You brought up an incredibly interesting point there. Easily digestible foods for infants. Because if you could make a mash of fresh vegetables or even juice it, which I just bought a juicer and somebody, I had a discussion with Clive DeCarl, and he's in the UK, nutritionist, and he was saying that something very similar. So babies, the food that they need has to be almost pre-digested for them. I mean, I'm not talking about, giving digestive enzymes. I was saying baby food needs to be incredibly, like you say, mushed up almost into pasty type form so it can digest so easily. But he was saying something else, that broth that has the same vegetables that's been cooked for about 3 hours on incredibly low heat. Take that through some sort of strainer and squeeze it out, squish it, and then get all of that. Let it settle for 10 minutes and then strain that yet so you only get the broth out of it. So the story was somebody's family member got into an accident, went into a coma, and they started giving her this broth juice because they needed it. She had to be alive for a certain number of days so they could collect whatever, their insurance, something. So they kept giving her broth of this, and then she lived for more than 2.5 years off just this broth of slow-boiled vegetables. And again, the thing about before they even put it in, they just cut it in incredibly tiny pieces. And then let it go for about 3 hours at very low heat and strain everything off. And that nutrition inside the broth was the same thing. It was almost pre-digested. So if you're thinking about digestible vegetables for an infant, then could you not take it to the next step to see, all right, what are these same vegetables that render more minerals, more vitamins, more micronutrients that come out in water solution, otherwise known as aqueous solution? If you're going to boil your like vegetable broth for 3 hours and give even higher nutrition to an infant versus just the mushed up vegetable itself. That should be worth something to families and those with children, should it not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a really important thing because you're trying to, survive and eat and stay healthy. it's not going to be very easy if you have a kid that's always crying and upset and having different problems due to their digestion, because there's a lot of problems with bacteria and stuff. And another good way to do that is if you steam your vegetables. If anybody's ever steamed your vegetables, you know that you get all that water in the bottom, and it's got all of that. Pretty much, it's like a broth. It makes a broth, all the little pieces of broccoli or whatever vegetable you cooked in there. And like you said, you could kind of, save all of that. And it's the most cooked part of what you're eating. So the baby would even do better with that. And I'm really into this whole idea of, stockpiling meals. So that's what we need to do. Stockpile meals.
Yeah, totally understood. So you have that in a ready pack, so you don't even have to try to do the preparation for it. Because who will have time to cook when you have so many other chores to do, from the garden to the watering to the dogs to the egg collecting to the whatever. Thanks for joining us tonight. David Dubine, Ransom Godwin, 420 TV Creations Films. Hoping that you got a little motivation tonight to go start growing something this weekend. Share the message with friends, family, tribe. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
NeoCutis has ascertained that the body's chemistry possesses essential catalyzing proteins, creating a revolutionary ingredient called PSP.
PSP, processed skin cell proteins, is a truly amazing ingredient. We have entered the cellular sphere. We have identified and obtained the specific proteins responsible for regeneration, and we have created a biotechnology process to manufacture these proteins from actual cultured skin fibroblasts.
move to the action. We now see the heart beating here in the child's chest. The heart is beating at a rate of approximately 140 a minute. And we can see the child moving rather serenely in the uterus. One can see it shifting position from time to time. It is still orientated in this manner. And the mouth is receiving the thumb of the child. The child, again, is moving quietly in its sanctuary. Now, this shadow, which we are seeing down at the bottom of the screen, is the suction tip. We have colored the suction tip deliberately in order for you to discern it more clearly. But the abortionist has now dilated the cervix and is now inserting this suction tip, which you can see moving back and forth across the screen. You will note that as the suction tip, which is now over here, moves toward the child will rear away from it and undergo much more violent, much more agitated movements. The child is now moving in a much more purposeful manner. Its orientation changes from time to time. It is rearing again here. Now, the suction tip has not actually touched the child, even though the child is extremely agitated and moving in a violent manner. The child has now moved back to the profile view, and the suction tip is flashing once again across the screen. The child's mouth is now open, and we will see that again on a freeze frame in a moment. But this suction tip, which you can see moving violently back and forth on the bottom of the screen, is the lethal instrument which will ultimately tear apart and destroy the child. It is only after the fluid has been broken, the sac has been disrupted, that the tip will actually come against the child. But we can see the tip moving back and forth as the abortionist seeks the child's body. Once again, we see the child's mouth wide open in a silent scream in this particular freeze frame. This is the silent scream of a child threatened imminently with extinction. Now, the heart rate has speeded up dramatically, and the child's movements are violent at this point. It does sense aggression in its sanctuary. It is moving away. One can see it moving to the left side of the uterus in an attempt, a pathetic attempt, to escape the inexorable instruments which the abortionist is using to extinguish its life. Now, the heart has again perceptibly speeded up. We can time this at approximately 200 beats per minute. And there is no question this child senses the most mortal danger imaginable.